Alright, everybody, if my internet holds up, welcome to another Game Design of the Month cast here on Game Wisdom. As always, joining me from Epic Tavern, Tomo and we're going to be discussing a very unusual genre this month.
Well, I mean, it may not be unusual, but there are some unusual features to it, especially as we kind of discussed and started exploring it.
But our topic is going to be, I guess, the only thing I could think of was something like management strategy or a King's Bounty like something along those lines for games like Heroes Hour that just came out, King's Bounty: The Legend, even going back to like older strategy games. Tomo just mentioned Disciples. I was thinking of stuff like Age of Wonders and games like that.
Yeah, it's a long tradition, and it's surprising how it's evaded labeling over the course of the last, basically the last 35 years.
Yeah. So for anyone who's like still arguing about Metroidvania design, coming up with a proper tag for that, get on this one for at least a little bit so we can get a actual name for it.
It's awesome.
Yeah, but for me, I love King's Bounty: The Legend. It was one of my favorite games of what was it, like 2007, 2008. It was like it feels like it's been like a long time ago. And I tried King's Bounty 3 and it did not work for me in the same way. Did you have a chance to play that one?
A little bit, and I liked it. But that's not. I mean, maybe King's Bounty wasn't as big a deal for me because it was just a dot on the path of so many similar sort of games. Like I was saying before with the call, the combat system of the original King's Bounty, I kind of had some problems with, partially because I was sort of already accustomed to some of the other approaches. But the overall vibe, it's go from town to town, grow your hero's power via light RPG system, and create armies that you use against other armies. And that vibe, I mean, there's so many games over the course of history that have sort of copied that structure. I mean, I don't want to say copied, but made a game of that structure, and many of them are among my favorites.
Yeah. Oh, and as a point of clarification, I said King's Bounty 3. It was actually King's Bounty 2. The whole naming convention is kind of weird, like the Final Fantasy games. And I guess for the chat, whether you're watching this live or recorded, have you had a chance to play like the King's Bounty type style games? And what are your thoughts on it? And we'll see if we get any comments there. But I was just looking up, apparently there is a new Disciples game that came out in 2021 that I did not even hear about.
I've heard about it. It's 4, right? Disciples 4?
I think so. It's Disciples Liberation.
Okay. Yeah, I found it because I was looking through uh, shoot, there was some game sales site, the name of which I can't remember right now, but they had a sale on the entire Disciples franchise, and I'm like, oh my god, there are a lot more games in this than I remember.
Yeah, and would you say like this kind of design that we're talking about? Do you think something like the Total War franchise would fit, or do you think that there are a little bit too many differences in terms of like the gameplay loop?
No, I think at its essential core, it is very similar. It's just that I would say the biggest thing that differentiates it is that people who are sort of hardcore fans of Total War
Hmm.
series may not be fans of many of the other games in the series. And I could just be talking out of my ass here because it's not like I actually know. And
Hmm.
my only real example I can draw from is myself, and I am totally a fan.
Hmm. And I was just looking it up. Did you ever play the game Ador? Eador?
I think so. Let me take a look at what it looks like. AT.
Because I remember that game kind of like blowing up like very quickly, and then it just kind of like disappeared.
Wait, are you talking about ADOM?
Uh, Ador, Eador.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Sorry,
Yeah, Adom is the
my brain calls
turn-based.
it. Eodor.
Ah.
But yeah, no, actually, I had a lot of fun with that game, and I was saying before too, like, I'm often kind of a bit of a game design snob, or at least I can be, and I'm
Mhm.
always excited about innovation and people exploring new ideas and really looking for people trying out new stuff and seeing how it can work. At the same time, when it comes to this particular genre, I've
Mhm.
always been very vulnerable to just people creating an experience that uses these rules and just lets you play as long as you want. And so
Mhm.
Eodor is potentially this huge number of hours played. And it's not like it like super evolves and gets like totally different after you've played it a bunch, but I still played it a bunch.
Yeah. One game that just like popped in my head that I really love, it's on my list of I someday want to go back and try and finish it, is a Tower of Time. This was a game that very much has like the King's Bounty kind of feel to it, but it has more of an RPG slant because of the fact that you are building your party out unique heroes, but you're still exploring this map, solving puzzles, gathering resources, etc.
Yeah, well, I mean, and it's interesting too. Like as we like I think I guess maybe part of the reason why this genre doesn't have sort of a stable and concrete label
Mm-hmm.
is that it sort of shares space with so many games that are in the end sort of different from each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it combines aspects of RPG, strategy, and even like some of the more advanced examples. It is kind of open world in a way. Like if you play King's Bound: The Legend, they basically just give you the entire map to start with, and your whole point of guidance is this guy impossible for me to beat? Yes slash no. And if it is, we go the other way. It's kind of like Dark Souls in that approach.
Yeah, no, it's actually I'm I'm trying to find the YouTube stream. Am I?
Oh,
Did, I'm sorry. I just wanted to get it up so I could
oh,
type into chat.
yeah. Oh, YouTube did not let me actually do it. Ooh.
Oh, there we go. I found it. I
Yeah, that
just found
was
it.
YouTube taking extra long and didn't actually post it live. Oh, so the last like 10 minutes or 7 minutes people didn't see. But thankfully
Ah,
I did record it, so
cool, cool.
we are going that one. Yeah, so the people watching this live, sorry about that. YouTube is being weird with its startup times and such.
Well,
Sorry
what's
about that.
funny is the weird coincidence, right? We have a 10-minute conversation, and right when I start looking for it so I can see what's going on in chat, it's like within 1 second of that, it actually goes live.
Hmm.
Tiny bit coincidental.
Yeah. But thankfully, through the magic of having recording, everyone will be able to at least watch the first part, or will be able to watch this when it goes up in the recorded form. Hi, Chris. Chris's comment actually threw me off. I thought we were live, but he was posting that in the well, in the in between there.
Well, and I
But
think his phrase, "the luck of the lucky sim," totally influenced my thought about what just happened too.
mm-hmm. But now that we are actually live, and for the chat watching, what are your thoughts on games like King's Bounty, Disciples, games that have that layer of management sim or management, and then the strategy layer on top or on the
So,
bottom?
I'm going to go ahead and start with the bold claim that's probably easy to disagree with or easy to pick apart is that there's this hybrid of
Mm-hmm.
game genre features that comes together in this shape, and it comes together over and over and over again over and over again over the course of the history of video games, and it's a good combo. It takes these ideas
Mm-hmm.
of a kind of a world map to explore, cities to capture and take their resources and upgrade. So there's like the RPG of the locations, And the locations, inevitably, when this is a good version of this game, they have a lot of variety. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's like, oh, you'll get more iron if you take this town, or this is a town, or this ruins. If you win the fight, your characters will get a special item or new followers, right? And this kind of lottery of military units and special items and learning new spells with combined with sort of a light RPG system related to your heroes, which then can influence and or boost and or increase the power of your army. The
Mm-hmm.
army composed of this kind of like group of units that you've sort of collected as you've traveled the land and
Mm-hmm.
or upgraded your own town, and that you're fighting against other factions doing the same thing. Like, when I describe it that way, it sounds like this very specific genre, but at the same time, there are games, if I think back, like Warlords has got to be the beginning of it, at least insofar as my memory is concerned.
Mm-hmm.
Although I would even go so far as to say that to some extent, Ogre Battle is in this
Oh.
vein of game, which, for it's a weird litmus test. If we're how addicted to Ogre Battle were you? And then it's like if you were very addicted, it turns out we have a lot of similarities.
Mm-hmm.
um, I could tell a story about that later. But this whole that and at the same time, like we were saying before, is that this genre doesn't really have like a clear name for it.
Mm-hmm.
But the people that love those games always know where to find it.
Mm-hmm.
And Heroes Hour is just it was I'm not going to say it was the best game that I played during Next Fest, but it was the game that I purchased within seconds of it being available.
Mm-hmm. And there's definitely a lot of like weird genre overlaps, as you just said, and I think it's like those genre overlaps. I think can greatly determine whether somebody is going to enjoy this or not, because we've seen like different takes on this. Like, if you remember with King's Bounty, the big thing that they did was they randomized what units could show up, units and spells and stuff that could show up in each one of the towns. While other ones may have active combat, some of them may have, kind of the auto battler design. I guess for you, like, where do you fall? Like, do you prefer like combat to be more engaging, or do you kind of like set the units up and then watch them go and do their thing?
Well, I've had so much experience with these game types. There's
Mm-hmm.
this one thing that I recognize. Generally, right out the gates, I'm more attracted to more engaging, more active combat. But
Mm-hmm.
no matter what that degree of engagement is or how much gameplay has been packed into that, I keep playing well past the point I want to keep doing that tactical combat.
Mm-hmm.
And so in a lot of ways, at the end or the end result, or once I've gotten into the sort of like mature relationship with the software, the nature of the combat starts to become irrelevant. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it's really important the way the systems of the game relate to winning or losing a battle. But the ones that have automatic resolution or an auto battler like feature set versus a super nuanced tactical set of things, eventually, if I can, I'm going to stop doing it. And if I'm in the context of like a game like Total War, I might find myself playing the game for hundreds of hours and actually become a little frustrated that I have to do the tactical battle because I know that the choices I'm going to make are going to be so much more effective than hitting auto resolve. And if I could hit auto resolve and it was effective, as in I'm powerful enough, I will definitely do that auto resolution. And so it really points to an addiction to, or like this really strong connection to that empire building hero
Mm-hmm.
general RPG. And I think somewhere in those words is probably where we want to invent the genre name.
Yeah, and the like different qualifiers there. Like for me, I am terrible when it comes to the Total War games. Like I still have yet to find one I can really get into and figure out. But I can play a King's Bounty game just like that is just like very natural to me. And it is very challenging, I think, to get like the balance of these games right because of kind of like what they give you. Like if you start the game and you're just surrounded by impossible fights, you're not really given like I think like the tools in order to succeed. And it's always, I think, very weird about like how they do the what was it, like the unit matchups? They like, oh, unit predictions. I'll tell you, you have a small chance at winning. Because I remember when I played the Legend that I chose the Sorcerer at the start, and the Sorcerer gets the Phoenix spell that is just completely overpowered in that game. And basically, the unit prediction meant nothing for me at that point. It was like, oh, it's impossible for my troops, really? I'll just put the Phoenix down right in their base. It'll do all this damage and they'll kill it, but then guess what? It comes back 2 turns later and then kills them even more.
Well, and that's actually, I know that from firsthand experience in Epic Tavern. We tried to create a sort of a temperature gauge on what expected success is. And if your systems aren't extremely predictable, which real-time combat is very rarely really predictable, or the degree to which your tactical choices can kind of increase your effectiveness, and then it becomes a bad measure, and that can be a problem. That said, at the same time, there is something that feels good about being told that this is impossible, and you being like, no, this is easy.
Chris says, is King's Bound like Heroes of Might and Magic? I want to say maybe. I do not remember Heroes of Might and Magic series that much.
Yeah, no. There's a lot of similarity. Heroes of Might and Magic is maybe a little bit more tactical in its play because it's got the tactical map, and so at least you get to kind of move units around, and there's like ranges for attacks and stuff. Whereas, sort of the starting point for King's Bounty is just an icon with a number, and that number does die rolls, and so like you'll have 99,999 peasants and 3 dragons, and you'll fight against some other stuff with numbers on the other side of the screen, and the numbers just go down until you win. But more recent King's Bounty games definitely created a rudimentary tactical map that you can use your units on as well. And so I would say that they're very much in the same family of games. Actually, it didn't. I think more recently some of the developers are the same. I'm not entirely sure because over time I've gotten some brand confusion over Heroes of Might and Magic as a brand and King's Bounty as a brand, as well as Elven Legacy is like another brand that's not quite the same, but it seems like they all use the same artists in their branding art.
Yeah, and trying to remember Elven Legacy. That name sounds very familiar to me.
Turn-based strategy game with fantasy units.
That describes a whole lot of them.
It sure does. It's like Warlock. Very much like. And again, my brain kind of wants to say that it's the same developer as Warlock, but I'm pretty sure it's not.
Yeah, and I think like for me, like the key elements that I want to see in these games is that kind of world exploration. Again, like stuff like being able to find like additional troop flags that raises your troop limit. Getting the different... I think unit diversity is a very big role here because of the fact that it is so like hero/class focus. Like in King's Bounty, I had like you could build your demon army. You can maybe get like 1 or 2 dragons at the start and hope for the best, or just completely wreck your pool just to get that one. What was like a Royal Guard knight in King's Bounty Legend that just like is like fully like decked out, and he's super slow, but if he gets to you, he's just going to wreck that enemy. And I think one of the things that I really like, I'm curious what you think about this, is the balance of kind of unit power versus unit numbers. Because this was something that they really did in King's Bounty. I don't know what they did in some of the other games we've talked about, but the amount of you can have in your field is dependent upon its overall power. So if you want to have 20,000 peasants who only do 1 point of damage, you can field that. But if you want that dragon who, let's say, does 15,000 points of damage in just a single hit, you can maybe field 1, and that was about it. So there's definitely a strategy in terms of quality versus quantity.
Oh yeah, big time. Yeah, and I think King's Bounty, especially, like, really sort of didn't care about um, those numbers making sense,
Hmm.
like the relative numbers making sense. Like, it was 100% on board. In fact, it was standard operating procedure to have things like 99,000 of X and 3 of Y. And it was interesting. Like, I feel like that's at least a part of, for me, of growing up, and um, some of the strategies that I'd be thinking about a lot in games is connected to that King's Bounty experience.
Hmm. And I think as the series went on, at least before we got to King's Bounty 2, and they did like kind of the expansions, part of the challenge was, I think, was them trying to come up with new ways of trying to add difficulty to the games. And I never did finish any of the expansions that they put out. I, of course, finished the original Legend, but I know they did, I think, what was like three, maybe four expansions or standalone expansions of content I just never got through.
Hmm.
Let's see.
Yeah, I mean, well, I mean, honestly, this is sort of the post 2015, post 2018 sort of Steam problem,
Hmm.
where some games, if they aren't like your favorite, and too many products show up, you get a little confused.
Hmm.
I mean, I've eaten that crap.
Yeah. To Chris's comment, what's a gameplay loop? It's kind of like Grand Campaign, maybe quasi open world. You have quests to go on, enemies are fixed encounters that are on the map, and you can engage or disengage with them as you see fit. But the big thing about Kingsbound, this is actually something that we haven't touched on yet. I want to get your thoughts on the punishment mechanic of King's Bounty. And that's specifically in the fact that there is a limit on how many units you can actually buy from each town. So if you get one really bad encounter and you lose your entire army, you may not be able to properly outfit with that same unit composition again. And for me, I always had the quick save, quick load on standby because if I lost my favorite units and I can't get them back, I'm not, we're restarting that fight. We're going somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah, no, I know that feeling. But that was a problem with a lot of those games
Hmm.
over the course of its history, is that it's very intolerant of failure. They were
Hmm.
sort of, they do represent some of the essential historical foundations of gamers and their relationship with save scumming. They've contributed to building that mentality.
Hmm. Yeah, the
I mean,
downwards. Yep.
and if modern developers could go back in time and make those games instead, they would put in different modes and different legacy features and promote players riding out a bad save, because you might get skill points you can use in New Game Plus. Back then, New Game Plus was like a great new idea, right?
Yeah, and like the progress of these games is always very challenging. Like we look at something like King's Bounty, or I'm sorry, with Hero's Hour, you can upgrade your hero. You have the entire town system, and then in King's Bounty they had the rune your three talent trees,
Yeah.
and it was so easy to screw those up when you play King's Bounty.
Well, it's something that happens in a lot of games, not just this genre, but
Hmm.
certainly this genre, where there are bad choices. And the way you learn what choices are bad is sort of by making them, right? It's not like
Hmm.
it's not like this carefully balanced set of choices. It's that it's almost like, well, it's like how could I know? It was just me and so and so and so and so and so and so, and we put that together, and this is how it turned out. I'm glad that you like. I get it. Everybody likes to choose the thing where they get the faster attack speed because that's just better or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, people can get in a little bit of trouble for such imbalanced systems, but I think back then exploring the strong points and the weak points of a tech tree was kind of what we were buying into when we played those games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see a opponent of the stream is definitely acting up still, internet-wise. Well, fortunately, again, I do have things recorded, so it won't be too bad, at least for the people watching us that way. Yeah, and the difficulty, I think, has always been that kind of challenge of these games. I guess here's a question for you in terms of your play style. Do you
Mm-hmm.
like to go the magic route of flinging spells and dealing with them that way, or do you like going like pure army, like picking like the warrior class and that kind of thing, and just feeling like big numbers and letting your troops do the talking?
I've kind of gone through my 30-year evolution. I think even as recently as 15 years ago or 10 years ago, I almost always picked the sort of warrior class and had a lot more comfort in strength, armor, and maybe crit chance or attack rate. It was always just the straight numbers and not the sort of ability sort of time cooldown approach. I would get sucked into that if the game demanded it, but I'd focus a little bit more on someone that looked like a paladin or like a dwarf in a ton of armor. But as time goes on, I just started exploring all of it and just trying to understand its system. I think you can take maybe a moment like Slay the Spire as a good example where it's like, oh, well, that's just a totally different set of gameplay choices. Well, we'll just got to figure out what those are, and I'll do that one next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, I've kind of swung between the mage and the warrior class when I play a lot of these games. Because with the warrior, you can really, I think, mess with the tactical layer, I think, a lot more. While the mage is just more, blast them down. But it is definitely, I think, more overpowered just because of the utility of the spells that you get in King's Bounty. And.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah, yeah, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of specifics in King's Bounty, like I think I was just wrong by always picking the warrior.
What was another one? So, like, going back to, like, Heroes Hour and just, like, kind of, like, more of an overall look at these games, one of the things I really like in terms of design is, again, like, how these systems are layered on top of each other. I think the thing that Heroes Hour does well, I'm pretty sure some of the older ones have done it also, is that kind of combination of, like, turn base on top of this layer. So you have that strategy of what you can do on each day, but you still have like that real time control in a way.
Yeah, no, I think I like the like I guess that's the innovative choice that Heroes Hour made, right? Is that tactical combat resolution
Mm-hmm.
is real time and so can be kind of hectic and it's a little sloppy and the screen gets full of guys and at the same time in the flow of that sort of time sensitive moment you can cast the spells and it's not like on turn one I always cast the thing that increases the damage of my archers and on turn two I always cast heal on my meat shields, and on turn three, I cast the nuke that does the damage to their big guy. It's not like that at all. I mean, maybe loosely in a timeline, but there's a lot more variety and a lot of chaos to kind of explore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to Pony's comment, yeah, like you can really get a lot of variety in terms of these games, in terms of what characters you get, what units you can feel. I guess I didn't play enough of Heroes Hour, so maybe you can clarify this for me. Do you get randomized unit choices on each like new world? Like, do they shuffle up what units you can get in the towns?
Not in the well. It depends. Like you can choose for your faction to be random, and then the units
Okay.
available to you will be dependent upon which faction you randomly are assigned. But the factions themselves have sort of like a town tech tree structure that relates to specific units that become available. Now, that said, there's still so much sort of random variety to explore in the terrain of the world that gets generated. So, there's like, um, let me see,
Hmm.
an example like Hall
Hmm.
of Crafts, a monument where you can create horn bowyers for either gold or other resources. So if it's a different one, I saw a different one, ones that look like a white mountain, and no wait, that gave me a spell. I saw a different one, and you can recruit a different type of unit. So those kinds of like unit generating sort of world locations are a big part of the normal course of the game, and so your army compositions will be heavily influenced by that theoretically.
Hmm. And I think, like, when I think about some of the interesting aspects of these games, is just how much the strategic layer can do or can be as important or as little in these kinds of titles. Like in King's Bounty, there's not really that strategic layer. But when we look at stuff like Heroes of Might and Magic, Age of Wonders, and some of those other titles, it is very much about you trying to support your armies. And I think again, like this kind of gets at the challenge of trying to put a name to the genre, because you can play it very much like a kind of just like an RPG where you go around the land, complete quests, do all that, or you can play like a 4X or a turn-based strategy game where you have that city layer or that kingdom layer that kind of supports your structure. Um, I was just like, for
No,
some
I,
reason. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think that's one of the biggest differentiating factors in the various versions of these kinds of games, right? Is the
Mm-hmm.
ones where you have to have a more serious strategy or a coherent strategy for your use of locations. Um, and I think that's how the genre started.
Mm-hmm.
Warlords is a really good game, and it was a really good game back then. You can actually play vanilla Warlords on iPad now or through the App
Mm-hmm.
Store if you wanted to kind of take a look at it. It might be a little too expensive for App Store,
Mm-hmm.
but it is the straight classic strategy game of 1990. And I have it on iPad. I've actually pumped a decent number of hours into it when, I'm on vacation or something, or you know, my eyes are glossing over while I listen to my kids say random stuff. They say lots of good stuff. It's not nice of me to say, but I do like talking crap to my kids. So, but Warlords is the kind of game where there's a context and a reason to build a tower in some potentially arbitrary spot on the landmass, so that you can plop your units in it so that they can have a higher defense because some other army is on its way, or
Mm.
fortifying a town because it's going to get attacked and you don't want to lose it. And then the kind of position of armies on the map and where they're moving and what sort of your current resource situation is and where your armies are in the moment, all contribute to determining sort of land warfare strategy related thoughts, and the
Mhm.
system of your town upgrades connect to that. And um, I probably got to say I do prefer the games where those strategies matter more.
Mm.
And it is less of an issue or less of a concern when you're playing King's Bounty, but it's still there.
Yeah. I just remember as we were talking, one game that I think really came close to being a really solid one, but it also has kind of like that issue of pacing. And that was Fort Triumph. Have you heard of that one, Tomo?
Fort Triumph.
This was a
How
game that
recent?
came out, wow, 2020.
Okay. Oh,
And
it's recent. Oh, I've seen the art, but I have not played this game. No.
yeah, and the reason why I wanted to bring this up is that I felt like the pacing of it kind of got in the way. It is a game where your battles aren't just these simple engagements. They are, XCOM style maps where it can take like 15 to 20 minutes to play through it. And I think that's another and this could probably lead into a greater discussion about when you mix genres or you have these different systems of how much does one system kind of dominate the conversation.
Yeah.
Like in like a game like King's Bounty or even something like Tower of Time and even like Hero's Hour, the combat layer is kept very brisk. Like maybe 2 minutes, maybe at most like 4 or 5 minutes for an encounter, and that's it. We get back to the map. But with a game like For Triumph, it was taking like 5 to 10 minutes, and I think this is a thing that always maybe stops me from playing a lot of the Total War games. Is that it always feels like my focus of what I want to do, I can't do, and what they want me to do, I don't want to do. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, in so many ways, I mean, there's no denying how successful the Total War series is,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know if there's a worse example of a game that'll force you into two very different patterns of interaction, and that both will suck down huge amount of time. Like
Mm-hmm.
you can get like, especially once the kind of sieges of castles or
Mm-hmm.
cities became a thing, you get sucked into a Total War tactical battle that's like 45 minutes or longer, and
Mm-hmm.
at the end of it you just lose,
Yeah.
right? And you go back to the strategy map and you're just like drained and demoralized,
Mm-hmm.
and your armies that just spent like 35 turns pulling together and like hours and hours of gameplay, and now it's just one brutal hour and you've lost it all. Like
Mm-hmm.
that can be very tough, and at the same time there's no way around it in the Total War shape of the game. It's the closest thing to a 50-50 split, where the strategy choices you make have this enormous and huge importance, and then this second by second make sure archers don't get chopped up by dudes with
Mm-hmm.
swords moment to gameplay is also just as important.
Mm-hmm. Did you play the Warhammer Total War games by any chance?
Huge fan, in fact. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
well, you know what? One of these days we should, maybe the next stream or the stream after, for the focusing on a game, we should just talk about the Total War series, and you should just, I don't know which one you'll like, actually. I guess maybe it's not as good an idea because you don't like these games as much. But
Well, I'm
yeah, I mean,
sure.
there's one could make a one semester class, and it's just about the trajectory of features in the Total War series, I think.
Mm-hmm. I bet Thorn would love that for to cover the
Nice.
Total War games. Yeah, and it's like you said, like where your focus on, and especially again if you're trying to do something that you don't like, it just really like I think drains your interest in playing a game like this. And I think that's one of the reasons why I think a lot of developers have moved away from kind of the multiple system focus of games, kind of like the XComs and the original Might and Magic and games like or Heroes of Might and Magic, where you have to be a fan of tactical strategy, but you also need to manage your base, and you also have the geoscape and so on. And we've seen, I think, more of like these melding of the various systems. So it's just one package as opposed to these two or three separate ones. But then I think it kind of dilutes kind of the impact of these games when you don't have that clear, I guess, delineation between System A and System B.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's at least half of it. But the other half of it is that, in all likelihood, you're better at making one part of it versus the other. So why not focus on that, right? For developers, whatever Creative Assembly did when it began, whatever led it to create Shogun Total War, um, that was just an uncommon set of things. And then maybe in today's market, it wouldn't have been a successful game, and there wouldn't be like 40
Mm-hmm.
iterations of that game type, and this at least 1.5-ish million strong army of people that are dedicated followers. Um, so it, the forces from yesterday that are strong today, um, they may not have succeeded in today's environments the same way. And at the same time, I'm very happy that they did. Um, and I still have this very deep hope that Total War Warhammer can become Total War Warhammer 40K at some point.
Oh, I'm sure a whole lot of people would love to see that.
When I
And
know why they won't do it, but I'm willing to help them figure out how to solve the problems.
there you go. Yeah, and I think I think it's kind of interesting because there is this like very wide spectrum that we can look at between games like King's Bounty, where it's very much squared down in terms of what your system interactions are, and then we go to the other end of the spectrum when we get to like the Total War style, Age of Wonders, where it is very much a full-on strategy game here and a full-on tactical or real-time layer over there. And it becomes, I think, like you said, like it's a very weird market for these kinds of games. Because, like for me, I love tactical strategy games. I have played a whole mess of them. Yet, I can't play a grand strategy or 4X game to save my life. Whereas I'm sure there are people who are the exact opposite of that.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, there are fewer
Mm-hmm.
4X or 4X type of players than there are sort of Civilization 5 players, right? To some extent, so it's sort of like a subgenre. There's definitely like this like ramp of complexity,
Mm-hmm.
and as you go up that ramp, uh, there's less oxygen to breathe, so fewer people go up
Mm-hmm.
there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I know for myself that I'm like I can't wait till they build the ramp higher. I may not have enough time in my life anymore. Sometimes it feels like to kind of play the games that are at the top of that ramp. Um, but I'm certainly excited about it. At the same time, those games aren't as good, right?
Mm-hmm.
The possibility of game quality or the max game quality is higher for the games that somehow suit the needs of more users.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not trying to say that that's a law or a rule. That's more just observation.
Mm-hmm. I forgot to ask. Like, popped up earlier about Ogre Battle. Did you ever finish Ogre Battle back in the day?
Yeah, I mean, I think I finished it many times. Well, my story with Ogre Battle is that I rented it from Hollywood Video when I was a kid, and this is where I discovered that if you're 47 days late in returning it, they just have you. They want you to pay $60 to buy the game, and that buying the game for $60 is a lot cheaper than all the late fees you racked up. I also ditched school for like 35 to 40% of that entire length of 47 days. I'd like hide the game and then like just push the limits of pretending I was sick so I could just play it all day. And I was losing my mind. I was like, progressively more tired and underslept.
Yeah, and this was back again during the '90s. We weren't used to playing these massive games. Like, imagine if Stellaris came out in like 1992.
Yeah, and back then I had close to infinite endurance for learning a rule set. I mean, I feel like I have really high endurance now, higher than maybe the average gamer. But back then, it's like no, it could just be like this giant pile of little chits with random letters on it. And I'd figure out the 480 letters and the sequence you needed them to be in, so that I could go to the next step eventually.
Sounds like trying to learn the adventure games during like the Golden Age.
That was definitely the way adventure games were in the golden age, and I didn't appreciate that. By the way, I was frustrated by those games and angry that they I don't know, tricked me into spending all that time.
To Chris's question, if you were to distill the experience of the genre, how would you describe it? And again, like that's like the trick. There's just several. Like, would you say there are any actual qualifiers to like the genre? Like anything that must be here, or it doesn't work?
Well, I before we get into like maybe specific features, I would say that there is always a vibe that the progression of the general is connected to the progression of your empire.
Hmm.
Regardless of what that means. And that maybe something in that connection is what's common amongst these games.
Mm.
And you could feel it, like if your hero, for example, couldn't have equipment, you're like, it's missing. Ouch! I don't like that. If your hero couldn't gain a level, you'd be like, wow, this is well, who cares if it's a hero then?
Mm-hmm.
And that's something I think essential to this genre.
Yeah, like there has to be, and again, like, this is where we get to kind of like this blurring of, strategy and RPG. That you have your generic units, your basic characters, and you then have like your quote unquote hero, like the character who kind of controls your entire army in that
Mm-hmm.
respect. And I think that's one of the reasons why stuff like King's Bounty and kind of like these smaller layer games are more interesting, or at least more appealing to me. Is that when you look at something like the Total War games, your hero unit is just like in the sea of all the other units on top of the base building, on top of the economy management, and so on. But in these smaller ones, you can just really focus your attention on that hero. And I loved when I played King's Bounty and you had like the gear that could actually change the properties of your units in some capacity. That you can make your morale so you can have the zombies working with the paladins, working with the demons better.
Well, the Warlords game, this kind of beginning of this genre, maybe. I'm sure there's a couple games that came before it, but it had a feature where the hero could increase the attack power of the units in its army. And you could pick up weapons or gear that would do that, and as well as do that if you gain levels. And what would happen is that you'd have these armies full of level 1 units that were more powerful than the most powerful units if they didn't have a boost like that. And it was sort of this essential overpowered feature of the game. And I don't see a lot of games approaching it. I feel like, especially Total War, you can't have an army that, if you make invincible, just gets to just take just scan lines across the territory until the whole territory is yours without any ability to resist it. Like, that overpowered nature got kind of taken out of the genre at some point. And I don't mean to say that that's a strictly positive thing. The finding that army or that general that is so powerful, it's a great feeling. It's like when you have a good playthrough, go back to Slay the Spire, right? It's like you're like, I got the right combo. No, nothing's stopping me this time.
Do you like the idea of having units being randomized, where you're... I guess that could even, again, like even make these even more confusing, adds in like roguelike elements, that you don't know what your unit composition is going to be on any given play. Because as you said with Heroes Hour, you have the factions that kind of tier, or they kind of put you in those specific tracks. When I played it on Wednesday, I got the faction where I could field war pandas, and my army of pandas fighting an army of demons.
Awesome. I think that it can work. It just depends on the rules of the game.
Mm-hmm.
I think at that point we just have to ask ourselves the questions like, why do you randomize a thing? And one thing I would point out is these games generally don't. This is actually a pretty important revelation. There aren't a lot of. Are there any? Are there any rogue light versions of this kind of game? I don't think there is. And there should be.
Yeah.
I would like that. I would definitely like that. That I could play and learn the rules of the game, and whether I succeeded or failed, I would gain like an account level XP of some sort or some kind of currency that then the next playthrough can take advantage of, and that my path through learning the game and getting through the factions and sending my general that's going to make my empire more powerful around is towards a multiple playthrough objective of some sort.
Mm.
I think that's an underserved space. I think that there's room for a roguelite meets Heroes Hour type of game.
Mm. Oh, somebody get on that right there. We just pitched you the next game design project.
Totally.
Yeah. And again, like the kind of I guess excuse me, the kind of malleability of the genre, I think, is definitely where we can see like that kind of strength play out. I mean, with Heroes Hour, the world is procedurally generated, but it's still procedurally generated like in a turn-based strategy game. That
Yeah.
the map is once it's done, that's it, and it's just you playing the game as normal. But having like those roguelike and roguelite elements could certainly be an interesting play of it. And like when you look at something like Tower of Time in terms of like where this malleability can go, Tower of Time is very much an RPG. And
Mhm.
the kind of like their focus is that every unit in your party is a hero unit. And it's up to you to figure out, okay, how do I build these hero units out to how I want them to be? And I enjoy that game, but again, it has that issue of what happens if you get stuck? And I think that's actually an interesting design point I want to get your thoughts on. How do you design these games around difficulty spikes or pain points? Because like we said, because they are so focused on building an army, building a hero unit, what happens when the player gets stuck? Like with King's Bounty in particular, if you get stuck in an area, your only idea is, okay, if this part of the map is inaccessible, I'll go over here. But then what I ended up finding in the expansion was basically like, okay, every part of the map is inaccessible. Okay, what do I do now when every fight's impossible?
And I think that's just sort of a feature of the game type is sometimes it doesn't quite work out, at least in the
Mm-hmm.
way that it's played out for many of these games. And I mean, and I wouldn't consider that's not a good thing. Um, but it happens. And I think the developers sort of in their minds are like, well, this game is meant to be played many times. And so you win some, you lose some.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Yep, and removing the micromanagement sounds interesting, Chris. And yeah, like again, like that's always been kind of the advantage of these kinds of games that they really let you have a wider array of mechanics. So you don't have to worry if you want to deal with real time if you can focus more on the tactical layer. But if you also want more real time, we can make that game around that. Like that was again kind of what Tower of Time did. That all the battles were real time pausable. And if you were playing that game on the higher difficulties, you had to make use of that pause feature just because of how much the game would throw at you. And just in weird ways, to remind me a lot that I'm playing Arknights right now in that respect of you can't just let it's not just about power, it's about the tactical side of things. And I think for me, again, like that is an essential element of these games. And I'm curious, from what you played of Heroes Hour, does the combat layer get more interesting, or does it get more involved in terms of the mechanics?
I mean, I think they do. They have that whole series of skirmishes to
Mm-hmm.
kind of and I'm kind of torn whether that was just something they put in there because they could and that they had this tactical battle engine, so might as well make a bunch of levels around it, or they were thinking it's chaotic. This is some of the hardest stuff to kind of see the impact of your choices. And so let's create these focused skirmishes so that you can go through and see what it's like to defeat each of these enemies and with some set
Mm-hmm.
of choices of units you could select or purchase. Um, there's a decent amount. Like I have a feeling that once I'm done playing Heroes Hour, that I'll have an intimate understanding of which unit combinations will give me a significant advantage against other unit combinations.
Mm-hmm. I guess as another factor of this, and this could easily segue into another topic of itself, the use of auto battling. This has been, I think, something that I think a lot of people may immediately go to something like the auto chess or the Dota chess. Like there's that craze, I think, for like about like what was it, like 6 months to a year of every developer talking about auto chess or Dota chess. I forget the name of it being the next big thing. But if we look back, we can look at games that featured auto battler systems in the past. Ogre Battle, again, being a really big example of this. So
Totally.
my question for you and for Chad: do you like auto battler combat? The idea that, okay, I put my units down, I hit start, they just do their own thing, and win, lose, draw, it's kind of up to the game at that point.
So I think at first I was kind of put off by the idea because I feel like if I don't think about it, that the game is taking control away from me.
Mm-hmm.
But after playing those games, what I found was there's this. I mean, it doesn't even matter if it's real time or turn based. That's because it's out of my control. What there is that there's planning,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's progression, and so my planning choices and what they could be, and what I'm heading towards, and how I'm winning in the short term to get resources to then purchase those upgrades. That's a pretty meaningful trajectory. Like it can be done in a way that is very satisfying. And then the game isn't about weird, finicky relationships between how much clicking I'm doing and selecting of
Mm-hmm.
things. And that stuff's just all either taken care of or not. And it doesn't matter because it's the same for both sides at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And, many games have failed at creating an environment, many real time strategy games at least, have failed at creating an environment that's a fair micromanaging environment between their units.
Mm-hmm.
Um, StarCraft aside, perhaps, because it's probably gotten the most amount of scrutiny and play, and so it's well understood. But a lot of RTSs out there are imbalances that are not well organized in the overall balance of the game. And if they were, it'd be better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that kind of gets at when we look at something like the Company of Heroes Dawn of War style of real time strategy, where
Uh huh.
you have that whole. The base building is not as big of a deal, but it still is that factor, and you're supposed to focus on the kind of tactical layer of how your units are positioned, making good use of powers, and it's a very hard balance to get right.
Oh, I agree. Yeah. No, I mean RTSs are really hard in general. I mean RTS is a painful genre. I mean, how many games are there out there
Hmm.
that were real serious attempts? I mean, we're not talking like teams like mine that are very small and busy doing other projects, like big efforts and exciting new ideas for the genre.
Hmm.
Aside from Relic, it's like everybody eventually falters.
Yeah.
I mean,
Uh.
I feel like even StarCraft faltered, so not everybody feels that way. But
Mhm.
to me, the greatest RTSs, are StarCraft, Age of Empires, and the well, I like Age of Empires more than I like StarCraft, and then Relic. I like so much of what they've done between Company of Heroes and Dawn of War.
Mhm. Yeah, and what you're just talking about in terms of the planning and the strategic management, I think a really good example of this is the mobile genre. There are a lot, and I mean a lot of mobile RPGs that are more on the idle kind of auto battler design.
For sure.
And that genre, in a way, I think has really flourished there because a lot of the monetization progression is done on the abstract layer. So they can make the basic gameplay or make the gameplay look very basic, and then we're just going to overload you with all these different upgrade paths and progression currencies and using the gotcha systems and so on.
Yeah, and you have to learn. You have to
Hmm.
learn what works and what doesn't.
Yeah.
But that said, I mean that's a valid way to approach things. We can have some amount of contempt for those systems because there are certain aspects of those game systems that are sort of simplistic and sort of uninteresting. But the parts that are sort of reasonable is this strange idea that you need some arbitrary relationships to figure out. It doesn't all have to make sense. What has to
Hmm.
happen is that you need some stuff to discover. You
Yeah.
need to be able to make a mistake. You need to have stakes behind the choices you make. and and then discovering something totally arbitrary can still be very satisfying in that regard. And then if you build a system with some of that in it, there's an efficiency, right? It's cheaper to make arbitrary differences between things in a system than it is for them all to be in perfect alignment. And if they're all in perfect alignment and they all make perfect sense, then you know what you're going to do already. And that means the other parts of the system you may not explore.
And I just remember there is a kind of roguelike take on this kind of formula, and that was the game Despots game that is in early access right now that I played, I think, last year. And that was kind of like auto battler. You're just picking what units, or you're giving characters items, and that kind of transforms their class. And I think, as you said, like the challenge of these kinds of games, like if you're going to go the auto battler route, is that the player needs to be able to, start tracing or start drawing lines between these different systems. Like, it shouldn't just be, I just throw a lot of stuff at them, they win. I throw a lot of stuff at them, I lose, and there's no way of knowing, why X worked versus Y.
Totally. No, I mean, I guess that's a universal rule with games, is that I need to be able to learn new rules. And that means that you can't tell me all the rules right now. Some of them have to be things that are saved for after I figure out rule A. Rule B can't be known until you know rule A, I mean. And then that rule A takes 4 tries, right? And then rule B becomes it's in sight. That's the sort of a classic structure of games. Despots looks really interesting, actually.
Yeah. And again, like I can recommend
everything
games
being purple.
I can recommend games for just about almost any genre now, the ones that I play. Yeah, and like to stick on like the kind of like idle auto battler theme for another minute, I think, as you said, like, very important is you can't hit the player with everything at once. And this is something that I see from some of the rougher ones, especially on mobile, that they'll just throw like every progression system at you at once, or they'll make it very annoying to sift through each one of these systems. Okay, I want to give the character this weapon, but why do they want to use that weapon and not this one? And then how do I use this? And so on. And like we've said, it's very taxing. I think that's kind of one of the takeaways from this, that you have to be very focused on where the player's attention needs to be at any given moment.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's also, something that's sort of kept this trajectory of game design moving at a slow pace, is that these are complicated games. They are essentially 2 major systems working together, and that's already all by itself kind of a pain in the ass. Back in the day, they wouldn't have had first-person shooters and RPGs mixed up together.
Oh,
because those developers didn't know anything about each other.
Or roguelike elements in a whole lot of games these days.
Oh yeah, and I can imagine, like, somewhere in the next, maybe sooner than we realize, but in the next few years, that you'll get a game that has yet more combination of stuff. Like, obviously, RPG elements exist in a large percentage of the games, and it's a benefit to many, many game types. But an uncommon combination, right, is like legitimate RPG progression combined with action mechanics. Dark Souls maybe being an outlier in this regard, or game, that entire tradition, Bayonetta, Ninja Gaiden, stuff like that. But so then, what do you add to that? Like, is there a way to have a slasher mixed with a RTS? Mixed with an RPG, and then what comes to mind, if anybody still remembers this game, there was that Battlezone game, the reboot of the franchise, where you were flying around in a tank, or it was a hover tank of some sort, but you had first person or third person controls over RTS controls over other units that were a part of your force while you were driving around and shooting the tank. Not haven't seen that come back, right? And those games didn't they weren't successful then. But is there room for a three-way genre mix-up in
Mhm.
your future? And
Hmm.
I have to imagine that it's going to happen.
That reminds me a lot of that Dungeons and Dragon RTS that came out, where you have your building the base, you have your normal units, but then you also have hero units who go down to the dungeon to find like rare resources and gear. And
Oh man, yeah, I love that idea.
I cannot remember the name of it. Let's see. I'm sure by the time I find it on Steam, if it is on Steam, somebody will already have it in chat.
Yeah, yeah. Dragon's Hard.
There
That's
you
what I
go.
called it, at least. Actually, I know that I'm friends with the guy who ran that company, Liquid Entertainment. Dragon Shard was an interesting game.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me. Now we're getting like on like RTSs here. Reminds me of that the Star Wars game that was kind of like Star Wars Grand Campaign,
Battlefront?
Galaxy of War, I think it was maybe.
Oh, Galaxy of War, huh?
I
What's
think.
interesting is that the what is it? Star Wars Battlefront Gold Edition, that Steam game that's been around forever. It's not a ton of new features, but it's solid and it's a fun way
Mm-hmm.
to. You could spend a small amount of money and get a several number of hours of good stuff. But is Galaxy at War like a
Maybe the wrong
co-op
name.
RTS?
It was an RTS. They,
Oh, there's a Galaxy at War mod for Men of War Assault Squad 2. I'm sure that's freaking awesome, but I wouldn't necessarily call that a RTS.
is this it? Oh, here it is. Empire at War. I got
Ah,
the
Empire
I
War.
got
Yeah,
the
yeah,
at War part right.
yeah. Empire at War Gold. Empire at War Gold pack on Steam, right?
Hmm.
So good. That's a solid game. It's a very enjoyable use of time. I recommend it. And every month that goes by, I'm sure you can find it for cheaper.
Probably. Yeah, the internet issues are definitely being a big today, unfortunately.
That
But
is too bad.
as a time check, we are over an hour in, so we could
Yeah.
start to wrap things up in the next few minutes. So I guess here's my final question for you, and then I'll throw it to you for your final thoughts.
Hmm.
So as we were just talking about in terms of the challenges of this kind of genre, what would you say, like as we're theory crafting here about all these genre combinations? What do you think, or what would it take, if possible, to make a mainstream version of it? We were discussing Elden Ring and Dark Souls, like at the start, just before this cast, in terms of you know being this triple A or even double A, just like non-conformance to design there. But in terms of like this genre, this like mix of genres, what do you think would make it more mainstream appealing, or can it be mainstream appealing?
It's always tricky, right?
Mm-hmm.
Complexity is not the greatest friend of mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that said, I think there's some insight to be seen in the success of Warcraft 3. Right? Warcraft 3 is sort of the beginning of this. Well, I mean, obviously, it's the beginning of something of the ancients. What's that phrase? Dawn of the ancients, the disciples of the ancients.
Are you talking about Dota?
Yeah, what's the first word?
Defense. I think it's defense of the agents. Let's see.
Defense of the ancients. Well, whatever, right? That the
Yeah.
logic of that experience is born from making a hero in an RTS, and
Mm-hmm.
obviously, the Dawn of War 2 is sort of like essentially revolves around that in its essential design.
Of
But
defense.
I think that's the linchpin, is to focus on those heroes and to kind of wrap the gameplay perspective of the player around that hero and its growth, and then sort of like streamlining some of the
Mm-hmm.
tactical battle and the empire management features. And I think you're in a position to create, like, we know that these games evoke a strong imagination response from their users, and there's not then that's partly like this genre has been in existence for as long as there have been PC games, it feels like. And so I think that there is a path to a mainstream product that uses a lot of those ideals, and it just becomes sort of like the glorification of the great general and his trajectory towards greatness, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, like, as we're talking, as you're describing that, the game Rise of Legends popped into my head, which that was a big, huge game's follow up to, of course, Rise of Nations, but it featured a very different approach in terms of that design, in the way that it focused more on smaller cities that you could then customize the various aspects, which would then also allow you to customize your hero units. And that, I think, as you said, could be a way to go. Is like this kind of like focusing down or focusing on a very specific thing. I think definitely is a factor here. I mean, we could certainly, if we had time today or maybe in a future one, talk about the rise of MOBAs and this idea of almost taking the strategy out of real time strategy and making it more of real time tactical combat.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you get this almost a similar shape of innovation in the context of Call of Duty 4's multiplayer, right? You change the nature of the game so that it is more, that the barrier to entry is lower. One of the problems with Halo 2 is that if you're good enough, someone worse than you can't beat you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a great environment to create like a community of players. Sometimes I think we talk about like lowest common denominator in sort of negative terms.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea that we could take close to everyone and make them enjoy a thing together, including those of us that are maybe hardcore players, that's an enormously positive thing. That's something important and new gets discovered anytime you make a product that can support that. And, maybe this is just in a lot of ways, so many combinations, which are complicated, we haven't figured that out yet.
Mm-hmm. Mario Party. Yeah, there's a topic we could talk about.
It's awesome.
So, I guess I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I want to talk about. Do you have any final points?
When we started this conversation, I was kind of jokingly saying that a game like Heroes Hour has nothing to add, and yet I'm going to play it for hundreds of hours. And I think after this conversation, I'd like to take that back. I think there is plenty for it to add, and I think that it is. I just have to be looking at more subtle relationships in the way the systems work together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's probably a topic, again, maybe this could even be a suggestion for one of the roundtable discussions about trimming like fat or trying to make as much of a streamlined or squared down version of a game and seeing if there's appeal to it. Because if you can get rid of a lot of those elements, like, do they really add to this experience, or can the experience work with them minimized or removed? Can certainly lead to its own different design. Again, like the auto battler being a good example. Like, who would try pitching the idea of it's a game where you don't control any of your units? Would that be appealing to people? And it was.
Well, I think the thing to look for when you're in that situation is, could this game be truly automated and it doesn't change? And I think, sort of for me, the most horrific example of that was that Diablo could play itself and it wouldn't be any different to me. And accepting that reality was kind of a bitter pill to swallow. But once you recognize that, you realize what it is really about the game that is holding you there. It's not a game about endlessly clicking on different parts of the screen, for sure. And it's not a game about drinking potions every time your hit points get low, either.
It's a game where you watch numbers go up to make other numbers go down or up at the same time.
Which is very much like an idle game in many ways. And obviously, I'm still not sick of getting better loot. And I feel like sometimes the hardcore fans of these games feel like you're attacking them when you make these kinds of claims. And no one likes to feel exposed or vulnerable, and everyone's watching them. At the same time, when we do so, we learn deeper insights about what it is about these things that really connect to us.
Mm. If you've played these, I'm not sure if you have. I'd love to get your thoughts on Clicker Heroes 2 or that Idle Dungeons and Dragons game that came out a few years ago. Like both
Oh
were
yeah,
trying to do like very different things with the idle design.
I'll have to do a bit of a refresher, but I played both those games pretty extensively. I mean, my general habit is that I'll have 1 to 3 idle games running at all times. And just for those of you out there that are interested in game design, my perspective is that there is no game type more important to study than idle games. And the reason is this, is that if you can make a satisfying and interesting experience without any mechanics, well, okay, and that's not fair to say because there are mechanics, but when you're just nakedly focusing on increasing the number for satisfaction, you really want to understand what is better and what is worse at that elemental a level. Knowing how those games are better or worse from each other feeds into how to make any design decision about any kind of game, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and we could certainly have an idle game discussion. I don't
Nice.
have idle games
Time.
because that would kill my productivity, especially if I'm trying to do stuff during the day. Because I'm that guy who will have to just keep checking. Okay, wait, I have to work. Oh wait, did I make sure to upgrade this? Oh wait, did I forget to buy this? Oh man.
Well, yeah, there is definitely a trap there because
Yeah.
the idle games with enough complexity, you can just find yourself staring at them.
Yep.
And just kind of like running thought experiments in your own head. You don't even have to click on anything, but you're burning time. Just pathway A, scenario C, pathway B plus scenario C, pathway C, pathway A plus scenario X, and you just like you just keep shoelace tying ideas, and then going like, nah, that's not the best. That's not no, and then you try something.
And when you were talking about kind of like games that just like really like felt weird with the whole idle design, the one that popped in my head was the endless runner genre. As somebody who plays a whole lot of platformers, it just feels weird when you're not able to tell your character to stop running.
Well, and actually, do we know? And does the audience know? Is there an autoplay endless runner? Not one where you swipe left and right to dodge things or duck or jump. No, it just runs. And then as you accumulate resources, you do things like upgrade left dash, left move response time, upgrade jump effectiveness, increase hit points. and it just keeps on running.
That's a really good question. I don't know.
I bet that's a solid idea. I guarantee you that would make money if a big mobile company that could push it to sufficient number of eyes did so.
Oh, one last recommendation. I tried out the game Loop Odyssey, not to be confused with Loop Hero.
Ooh, yeah. I haven't played it, but I have it, and I'm ready to go.
Yeah, that is very fascinating. I mean, a lot of people I think immediately discount it as a clone, but it is most certainly not of Loop
Is
Hero.
it not the same people?
No, it's from a completely different developer.
That is crazy. That is too crazy. I can't even accept that statement. Damn, because to me it looked like the Loop Hero guys released their tool set and made a game out of their tool set. In which case, my brain was like, "I love you guys so much."
But yeah, I think we can wrap things up here. But I think really fascinating talk, especially about trying to like minimize certain aspects, or again that kind of focus on specific gameplay loops. So I guess for my final thoughts, or it's kind of like summarize everything. Like when we talk about this kind of design, it really is about having a central unit or figure that you can focus the loop around, or I'm sorry, the gameplay loop around. And it is about how you kind of focus these systems onto specific layers. Do you want your game to be more focused on the tactical layer? Do you want to be more focused on hero customization and progression? Do you want it to be a city builder or a grand strategy game? But what separates this from, again, like the Total Wars and grand strategy games is that there is a singular focus. Like, one aspect has to be the guy on top. And when you try to make everything equal, like with Total War, or trying to think of some other examples off the top of my head, it becomes a lot harder to get that pick up and play feel or that approachability. But there is definitely, I think, something worth studying about, removing or trimming as much of the fat of these designs. Like, have a game that could almost play itself, and can you still make that a very involving and intriguing experience?
Yeah, and I think that's my final thought will just be riffing on your thought, which is to say that there are simpler ideas probably for you to pull together to kind of like try and bring something innovative and new to the industry. But that said, as we use up those simpler ideas, packed into these sort of difficult problem spaces are interesting and new, potentially mainstream, exciting ideas built out of what seem like complicated yesterday's hardcore stuff.
Or just some crazy combination that no one would have thought, combining apples and skiing or scuba diving equipment, and it
Totally.
somehow creates this great idea.
Well, and that's the thing though too is the concepts of auto battler, they are going to be an essential piece of accommodating sort of that new combination of ideas.
So, for people watching this live or record, hopefully with the internet issues still happening right now, what do you think about these kinds of games in terms of streamlining certain aspects of the design? And is there a point where you can go too far with it? So let us know in the comments down below, but we'll wrap things up here. Of course, this will go recorded in a few weeks. Tomo, as always, thank you for hanging out. And if you have anything new or existing you'd like to pitch, go right ahead.
We're still working on Epic Tavern, and we hope to get out of early access this year. And I also just recently submitted a panel discussion about adapting existing stories to different mediums to Ludonarracon. So maybe I'll have a presentation there.
Nice. I have to think of a pitch for the. There's a comment here. Too many games. I would like to pitch a panel, but I have no idea what I would offer to them right now. If there was any ideas, let me know.
I love talking about stuff, right?
Yeah. But for everybody watching, thank you so much for tuning in. I include links to Epic Tavern and such in the description down below. And we try to do these at least once a month along with our roundtable discussions. I will be back later for my regular game streams. Do the liking, subscribing, commenting, things like that. And check out the Discord as well. But Tomo, it was a pleasure hanging out with you tonight. And we'll be back for another one of these again real soon.
Awesome. Yeah, as always, great conversation. Thanks,
All right.
Josh.
Not a problem. So for those of you watching, come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, whereas in the art and science of games. And until next time, take care.